So use the graph of the function f shown to the right to answer parts a through n. So a says find f of -14 and f of 4. So looking at this graph over here, we see that there's ordered pairs present. Remember, the input values are the x values and the output values are the y values. So remember, if I give you this f of x, let's see here. So f of x, notice how what's inside here is going to be the x value. So what's inside the parentheses is actually going to be the x value. And the answer to this is actually going to be the y value. So if I'm asking for f of -14, what does it equal? Well, notice how the input value is -14. It's going to go through some type of calculations, which we don't know what the formula is, but the result is going to be the y value. So where x is -14, we see that the y value is -2. So that means that f of -14 would be a -2. What's f of 4? So again, f of 4, the 4 represents the input value. It's what's going through the calculations. The result is going to be our output value. So again, the 4 is the x value. So here's where x is 4. And the y value is also a -2. So we get a -2 there as well. So if I want to evaluate f of 12, again, using the graph, we find where x is 12 at is over here, where when x is 12, the y value is 2. So f of 12 would equal then this 2. F of 0, x is 0, that's here, x is 0. Notice that the y value, it's going to be this point here, actually. 0, -1 is this point, actually, right there. So 0, -1 would be that spot on the graph. And so when x is 0 or f is 0, the y value is going to be that -1. So next question is f of 4 positive or negative? So one thing to pick up on is, remember, f of 4 is going to represent the y value. So remember, if we're talking about a graph, if you're in the first quadrant, the x value is positive and the y value is positive. If you're in the second quadrant, the x value is negative and the y value is positive. If you're in the third quadrant, the x value is negative, the y value is negative. If we're in the fourth quadrant, the x value is positive and the y value is negative. So f of 4 means we're talking about where x is 4. Notice that the solution actually is a -2, but notice how we're also just in the fourth quadrant. That means our y value has got to be a negative value. So is f of 4 positive or negative? Well, it depends on the y value, and since the y value is negative, we end up with a negative value there. Or in other words, we're in the fourth quadrant as well. So the next question is f of -14 positive or negative? Notice how, again, we actually evaluated f of -14 up there, and we kind of see that it was a negative value there. So that's also going to be a negative. So again, f of -14 put us in the third quadrant, and notice that in the third quadrant, the y value is negative. So E, for what values of x is f of x equal to 0? So notice how the 0 actually represents our y value. So the 0 is our y value. We're actually kind of now going backwards, and we're trying to find the x value. So where the y value is 0, notice that there's actually two spots where the y value is 0. One of them is x is 8. And another one we see where we're seeing is this -2, 0. So -2 would also be a value for x. So f of 8 would equal 0, and f of -2 would also be 0. So there would actually be two x values that have a y value of 0 or an output value of 0. So what values of x is f of x greater than 0? So notice how, again, 0 represents the y value. So we actually have to have a y value that is greater than 0. So where are the y values greater than 0? Remember, the first quadrant, we had x was positive, y was positive. In the second quadrant, x is negative, y was positive. In the third quadrant, x is negative, y is negative. In the fourth quadrant, x was positive, y was negative. So again, when it says f of x is greater than 0, what they're saying is our output value, or our y value, has got to be greater than 0. So what this tells me then is I'm looking for above the x-axis. Because if you're above the x-axis, that's where all the y values are greater than 0. So notice that we're looking at the first and second quadrants. So we're looking at this region here. So where the graph is above the x-axis is what we're talking about. What they want us to do is they want us to type a compound inequality and use a comma to separate the answers there. So what we're picking up on is it stays above 0 starting at negative 12, and it stays until you get to where x is negative 2. So between negative 12 and negative 2, so this is going to be a between statement. So we have a y is, I'm sorry, your x value there. These are your domain values, your input values. So x, notice, remember, it's always got a point left, so I got to be greater than negative 12, and I have to be less than a negative 2. So it's one of the regions. So notice that you're above the x-axis here and here, so that means the y values are positive or greater than 0. Also over here, so notice how we're above the x-axis over here. So between here and here was one interval, and then between here and here. So notice that 8 would actually be 0, so we can't include that. But notice how we can include the 12, because 12 does give me a y value of 2. So that is a positive value. So you can include the endpoint over here, but you can't include the 8 because that y value is 0, and we have to be above, not on the x-axis. So between 8 and 12, but including the 12 and not including the 8 would be the intervals there. So next question is, what is the domain of f? And they want to use an inequality for this. That's set the rotation, so this means we want an inequality. So again, domain is your x values. So notice that the furthest x value we see is at negative 14, and the graph continues all the way over here to the right until we get to this 12. So your domain is going to be all the numbers in between negative 14 and 12. So negative 14 is your left bound, less than x, and less than 12. But we have to include the endpoints here. So negative 14 and the 12 are both included in our domain. What is our range? Our range, again, notice how it involves y, so we have to make sure we use y here. So y is your smallest y value up to your largest y value. So it looks like it goes from a negative 2, it travels all the way up to a 3. So all the y values exist in between those values there. So the lower bound is the negative 2 is less than or equal to the y, which is less than or equal to the 3. So the y values is more this up and down. So bottom to top kind of concept. So what are the x-intercepts? The x-intercepts are where it touches the x-axis. So it looks like I see negative 12, negative 2, and 8. There's 3 places where the graph touches. So negative 12, notice how, again, a lot of stuff is from left to right. Negative 12, negative 2, and 8 would be the x-intercepts. The y-intercepts would be where it touches the y-axis. Looks like the 0, negative 1. So negative 1 would be your y-intercept. So how often does the line y equals 1 intersect the graph? So if I clear this all off over here, it's getting kind of messy. So y equals 1, remember that's a horizontal line. So 1 looks like that's about right here, going through there. So if I look at that line, y equals 1, it looks like it touches the graph 1, 2, and 3 spots. So it intersects the graph in 3 spots there, 3 times. So how often does the line x equal 4 intersect the graph? Well, x equals 4 is going to be a vertical line, so it's going to be kind of going this way. So this vertical line, it looks like it's just touching the graph in one spot. So 1 point of intersection. So we would just use 1 there for that. So what values of x does f of x equal -2? So again, notice how this is the y value. The y value is the -2. We're looking for the x values to go with that. So where the y value is -2, I'm seeing 2 spots here. Get this out of the way. So the y value is a -2 here, and the y value is -2 there. So it looks like there's 2 x values to go with that. So we would say -14 and a +4 would be that. So for what values of x does f of x equal 3? So remember, again, the y value is the 3. We're looking for the x value that goes with that. So where the y value is 3, we're seeing just a spot there. I don't see any other ones across here. So that looks like there's only one x value there. That's going to be the -6. So that's kind of helps us interpret some of the questions there on using the graph with involving domain and range.